Well, one thing I think one has to realize with exploration, particularly as a very long term endeavor, is the need to align the different parts of the government with the programs and budgets that are necessary for exploration to succeed. If you look at the Bush 41 administration, the Clinton administration, Bush 43, and now the Obama administration, each presidential administration has faced different combinations of both support and opposition for exploration. In the case of the Bush 41 administration, President Bush at the time made a speech calling for a space exploration initiative, returning to the moon, going on to Mars. He did it on the steps of the Air and Space Museum with the Apollo 11 astronauts standing by his side. The administration was very supportive of this. The Office of Management and Budget, under actually Dick Darman, the director at the time, was actually very supportive of increased spending on space. In part, this was seen as a way to offset some of the declines that were going to occur in defense spending with the end of the Cold War, a way of retaining key technical capabilities in the country, and a way of engaging our allies and partners in a new post-Cold War world. However, the Congress and ironically NASA were not as supportive. NASA had its plate quite full with the Space Shuttle program and with the Space Station program at the time, and did not feel that they were really in a position to take on a major new endeavor. Congress, once they understood something about what the cost would be, even spread over decades, was also immediately opposed. So between Congress and a reluctant NASA, the Space Exploration Initiative largely went away. In the case of the Clinton administration, there was a policy decision that they were really not interested in doing exploration beyond low Earth orbit. But they did make a decision to stay and be committed to the space station program after some initial skepticism. The reason was largely because they found a geopolitical rationale for the program. In this case, it was the bringing of Russia into the partnership to symbolize a post-Soviet relationship with Russia. In the case of the space station, this idea didn't really come primarily from NASA. It came up in the context of discussions between Vice President Gore and Premier Chernomyrdin on the Russian side as we discussed a variety of ways the U.S. and Russia could cooperate in a post-Soviet environment. NASA played a very constructive role, however, in laying out an initial program, the Shuttle Mir program, to build experience and to learn more about Russia and what their capabilities were. And this, in turn, built upon earlier cooperation in the Apollo-Soyuz test program. So NASA's technical expertise and NASA's technical guidance were integrally part of shaping what became a practical way of involving Russia in the International Space Station program. But the reason for the involvement and the support for the program was driven by geopolitical needs at the highest levels. As you moved into the Bush 43 administration, of course, the seminal event there was the accident with Space Shuttle Columbia. In the aftermath of that tragedy, there was an examination during the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, which concluded that NASA had been trying to do not only too much with too little, but with inadequate direction as to where they were going and why they were going. Why were we placing human life at risk? If the Challenger accident earlier had posed the question, why are we risking human life to place payloads in orbit that could be placed by expendable vehicles? And of course, the answer was we shouldn't do that. The Columbia accident, to my mind, raised deeper questions of to what purpose is risking human life worthy at all? And in the case of the aftermath of Columbia, I think the conclusion reached by the administration was that if we're going to be placing human life at risk, it needs to be for high stakes. It needs to be for things that cannot be achieved in any other way. And that human exploration was a unique endeavor that had really no counterpart, could not be done by robots. It was really the expansion of human presence across the solar system, which was so large and so challenging that the risks could be made worth it. Now, in this case, the decision was made to retire the shuttle, to move to a newer generation of safer vehicles for getting humans into low Earth orbit. A direction was given to NASA to return to the moon, proceed on to Mars, and to do so not as a race, but as President Bush put it, as a journey. And that in this case, there wasn't really a specific timetable that had to be met for Cold War purposes, but really it was going to be a go-as-you-pay sort of endeavor. So if budgets were limited, then other goals like the moon were going to slip out on the schedule to the right, and the system would adapt to the resources that were available. But the general direction was very clear. The need for involvement of international partners was very clear, and the need to take greater advantage of the private sector. in terms of being able to deliver first cargo and later crew into orbit was also very clear. This mixed approach had found great support with the Congress. In both 2005 and 2008, back-to-back NASA authorization bills were passed, which endorsed this approach, and in 2008 specifically endorsed the major components of what was known as the Constellation program. In the Obama administration, initially there was a pause to assess the direction of human spaceflight, which of course is a very normal thing for an incoming administration to do. The Augustine Commission, through 2009, took a very close look at the program and concluded that more funds were needed if there was going to be a robust exploration program. They also concluded that there needed to be a range of options that could be done, what they call the flexible path. The Obama administration, however, didn't really accept the need for more funding, and they didn't really accept the need at the time for greater definition on destinations and schedules. Instead, they initially proposed a program where not only would Constellation be canceled, not only would the Moon be canceled as a destination, but rather a more capability-driven approach would be taken, primarily dependent upon development of new technologies in the private sector. The Congress, which as I had mentioned had bipartisan support for the prior program, reacted rather negatively on a bipartisan basis. This resulted in a long political debate that in 2010 resulted in a new NASA authorization bill, which kept some aspects of the administration proposal, particularly in terms of new technology and commercial cargo and commercial crew developments, and did not reverse the cancellation of Constellation, but did institute the Space Launch System program and what later became reknown as the Orion program as a mixture of both government-led and private sector-led activities for future exploration. The Moon was still placed off in the distance. The administration's statement of national policy talked about human missions to asteroids and eventual human missions to Mars, but really without a specific architecture. In this case, in contrast to, say, the case of Russian involvement in the Bush 41 administration, NASA technical expertise came after the fact, not prior to the decision. NASA was not consulted in great detail, and this left the White House at quite a disadvantage in terms of explaining the technical merits, capabilities, and trade-offs that were made for that program. This has become an ongoing issue as the administration attempted to sell this program to the Congress and to the scientific community. In each case, Bush 41, the Obama administration, Clinton administration, Bush 43, you can see differing mixtures of White House leadership, NASA involvement, and of congressional involvement. So in executing a long-term program of exploration, it's important to try to get all three of these power centers lined up with them. This doesn't mean that NASA gets to determine and direct what happens, but NASA's involvement in the technical definition of alternative architectures and trade-offs is critical to informed policymaking. And the role of NASA in this is to be used as a source of technical truth for policymakers. For policymakers, it's important that they not only consult with and use NASA, but they also consult with their counterparts in other parts of the government. Congress, of course, working with the administration, but also, more importantly, the administration working with the Congress, because it is the Congress that ultimately authorizes and appropriates the monies that the administration's plans will depend on. Neither can proceed alone. Both are necessary together, and both need to be informed by the technical truth and content that NASA can bring to bear.